Hi, welcome everyone. For those of you just getting in, we are going to give it another about 2 minutes or so, just to let some more people get into the meeting, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Okay. Hi, welcome everyone. It is 6:30, so we will go ahead and get started. It's my pleasure to welcome you to Northern Kentucky History Hour. I'm your host for tonight, Heather Cook, joining you live from my dorm at the College of Worcester, where I'm currently a sophomore studying political science and history. Northern Kentucky History Hour is a project of the Behringer-Crawford Museum, Northern Kentucky's History Museum. We'd like to thank all of our sponsors. Behringer-Crawford Museum is supported in part by the City of Covington, Kenton County Fiscal Court, Arts Wave, Kentucky Arts Council, Northern Kentucky Sports Hall of Fame, the Carol Ann and Ralph V. Hale Jr. U.S. Bank Foundation, and our members. If you're not yet a member of the museum, please consider joining us for access to discounts and exclusive programming. You can learn more about that and join at our website, bcmuseum.org. Before we begin, let's go over a few reminders. If you have a question or comment to share, you can type it in the chat or the Q&A feature, and we'll try to get to as many questions as immediately following the presentation as possible. Also, there will be a quiz question tonight, so the first respondent to enter a correct answer in the chat on Zoom or Facebook Live will win a Northern Kentucky History Hour prize, and most importantly, bragging rights. So let's meet tonight's speaker. Bryan McIntyre, known to many Camp Ernst alumni as Lincoln, jokes that he's been at YMCA Camp Ernst since its founding in 1928. In reality, he has worked summers at the camp since 1973, with a brief hiatus in the 90s. He spends the school year teaching English part-time at NKU and then moves out to camp each summer, where he enjoys early morning runs along all the camp roads. Bryan is the in-house camp historian, presiding over monthly camp history chat Zoom calls and keeping documents up to date for their American Camp Association accreditation. He is the author of Camp Ernst's 90th anniversary history booklet and is working on the 100th anniversary book for 2028. Bryan, welcome. If you are ready, we can go ahead and get started.
Yep, works with me. The screen share here. And there we go. Well, to start off, I'd just like to welcome everybody. We will start with a trivia question. For whom was YMCA Camp Ernst named? Now, there's a bit of a hint in the question, obviously, but I'm looking for something a little more specific. So if you want to get your answers in, it does come up relatively soon in the slide presentation. So I guess you could wait until then and see if you can beat everybody else. But let's get rolling then. We are approaching our 100th anniversary in 2028, as I just mentioned, and we're going to be focusing tonight on the first 25 years, from 28 through 53. And but for those of you familiar with camp, you recognize the dining hall. You can't respond to me now. I'll find out later how many people here are familiar with camp. I would assume some might be, at least to some extent, maybe even that have attended. Summer camping, as we know it today, got its start. I guess as first camp would have been 1861. It was gun school. With GUNN. It was the person's name actually. And they had a year-round boarding school. And during the summer, they have some land near the school that they used and went out for 2 weeks. And back basically just had classes still, but they were outdoors. They did outdoor activities and so on in addition to classes. Then as years passed, various organizations starting camps, other churches did, and so on. The first YMCA camp, which came to be known as Camp Dudley, was founded in 1885 and is still in existence, although no longer a YMCA camp. They went independent in 2016. This is Sumner F. Dudley is in the, I don't know what point it is, here in the center with the large mallet with his staff. So just I mentioned that. And then the Covenant Y had some camping, more just overnight and so on, and out in what's the Rosedale area and around Covington, Latonia area. And this is just out of way. It was more in the country at that time. It was built in 1920 with funding from this Ernst character. I won't say more about him now because you served in the trivia question. But he provided the funding. And there was a building there. They had dining inside the Ernst Lodge. There was also some areas they could do camping. There's a couple of tennis courts, and just general outdoor activities, picnics and such. And over in the picture on the right, the gentleman in the back row on the right is Willard A. Hutton. It says William in the caption. Ignore that. His name is Willard. He was the general secretary for the Covington YMCA. In today's parlance, that would make him executive director of the Covington Y. And the woman second from the left is Ann Campbell, who will be coming up here again in a bit. I'll say more about her later. And then beginning in 1924, the Covington Y sent a group of boys down each summer to Camp Daniel Boone, which is located in Jessamine County. That's it's kind of south and a bit west of Fayette County. If you're familiar with that, it butts up against it. It's on the Kentucky River, and they operated a camp there from 1912 until 1978. And the boys from Covington and also would go by train to the area there, and they get picked up at the station by the camp truck. They did not ride that truck all the way from Covington. And there's just a few shots of Camp Daniel Boone. That's their main building and some of the cabins they had. They had platform tents as camp later did, although different style. And their swimming area. And the picture up in the upper right corner, the first boy right here, we have an awarded camp started in 1928, continues to this day, called Honor Camper, for basically kind of back originally was more Camper of the Week, the kind of camper that exemplifies good character, displays good character qualities, and just really helps out other campers and such. But anyway, the boy here on the right, well, not a boy anymore, but not around anymore. His name was Henry Childress. He was honor camper number 3, later an editor for the Kentucky Post. So, and here comes the answer. So, haven't guessed yet. The Covington Y wanted to start its own camp after those experiences at Camp Daniel Boone. And so they turned to longtime YMCA president, served 42 years as president of the Y up until his death, actually, in 34. Senator Richard P. Ernst. He served as United States Senator from 1921 to 27 for the state of Kentucky. His house still is standing. That's on the left. That's on 4th and Garrett in Covington. And he gave some money to get the tents and a dining hall and such. We'll see that in a moment. But it was announced that the Covington Y was doing this camp. The location they found was farmland in Boone County. It would have been previously, well, I mean, not previously, it would have been various things. Actually, there's a couple of, a 2-parter I saw on the Behringer-Crawford website for the History Hours about the history of the Big Bone area. They had, well, the Masterdome bones and so on, and the later they had a couple of hotels there, and mineral springs had a spa type situation set up. By that time, it had kind of fallen by the wayside. That part of it was still just a small community. But anyway, the area where the camp was located, it's where Big Bone Lick State Park is now located. It became a state park in '62. actually a person who was very active in getting that declared a state park was a one-time camper from Camp Ernst and counselor, and also a longtime judge executive of Boone County. His name was Bruce Ferguson. Some of you might have run across that name before. But they did load up the truck in this case, although I hope they didn't ride in that same fashion as pictured here. I think it was more for the photo op, but they did go out, and they called it Camp Big Bone those first couple of years. The picture on the right's not great. It's from the newspaper, but it does show the tents, and there's a bridge. The boys came out and helped work early on and helped with finishing up some bridges across ravines and streams, and in a couple of tennis courts, basketball court, well, basketball goal anyway, not a court. There was also a dining lodge, see pictured in the upper, or in the top rather, and then you see some of the tents down below. And they had archery was a big activity there. They made their own archery kits, the bows and arrows, everything, made it themselves. And that was a year-round activity for them. The company and Y would compete against other YMCAs in archery. I don't know if the other Ys made their own bows and arrows or not. It seems only fair that they would. Anyway, on the right is a daily schedule beginning at 6:15 with reveille, going up till all the way up till in the really late at night, 9 o'clock. It wouldn't be dark yet. Oh well, but they went to bed then. But all the activities during the day was their chapel service, meals. They had swimming on 3 different occasions. Their morning dip, not to be confused with the morning swim at 11 or the afternoon swimming period at 4:30. And then games and archery, nature hikes, just all sorts of just typical things. A nightly campfire. And there's a couple of the tent groups. And they basically set up to have 7 campers and 1 tent leader per tent. And the tents were white canvas and sat on top of a platform to keep it off the ground. And you can see the lantern on the one on the right, and have that for their getting around. Didn't have electricity back then, well, at least not at camp. And I think that the counselor on the bottom one looks a bit old to be a counselor. He was actually a local minister, Methodist minister from Interest, his name was. But in the first couple of years, they had some ministers come out for visits, and some of them would actually stay out for a session or part of a session and help with running the camp. And they're just swimming, and they put a dam in one of the streams there to build a nice swimming area. Out on the right, they're taking a hike. They did a hike every session. That was just part of their routine. And one of them ended up being about 25 miles total. They would hike from the camp down to Rabbit Hash, go across the river by ferry, and spend the night in Indiana, and then hike back the next morning. Well, after running the ferry back across, of course. And there's the camp store on the top, and then the campfire at the bottom. And after a couple of summers there, 28 and 29, they're thinking, hey, this is going really well. They've gone from 6 tents the first year to had to get 2 more the next year. And they kept getting more and more people wanting to come. So they decided it'd be better if they could have their own permanent location, because that land there, it was just being borrowed. It wouldn't necessarily be available. In fact, it most likely wouldn't be at some point. And they didn't have no real area to expand. And so thought it'd be nice to expand. And so they turned once again to the YMCA president. By president, by the way, make that clear. We have the board of directors, and the president of that would be the board of directors or chair. It varies from association to association. We also have currently with Y, we have the president and CEO, so it's a whole different title. So I just trying to make that as clear as possible. But he was basically the chair of the Covington YMCA board. But turned to him, and he said, "Sure, we could certainly look into some land." And so they started looking around the area in northern Kentucky, trying to find a spot. They located an 80-acre farm out in Boone County, and in the fall of 1928. Richard P. Ernst, Willard Wade, and a group of boys drove out Route 18, which is just a 2-lane road back in the day, and had to hike in the final 3 miles to camp because there was no road. Well, I guess more for just a trail, I guess you could go back, but not suitable for driving with cars. It was just all farmland. hiked back, and then Ernst and Wade stood on the hill and looked out over the valley where the boys tossed football down below. Ernst turned to Wade and said, "Well, is this what you want?" He said, "Yes, Senator, it is." And so, okay, that's it. He purchased the land, and the subsequent 5.57 acres a couple of years later, and then donated all of that to the Covington Y, and the camp was named in his honor. But once the land was purchased, there was still a lot to do. And so in the spring of 1930, got to work. This is, for those of you familiar with camp, the building on the left under construction is the dining hall, which still stands to this day. And then down below, where there's just a tent set up for equipment, and there's a car over here. And then over on the right, they're digging a well. That's where they got their water. There was no other way to get water. They used a well, and they also brought water in barrels during the summer. It was finished then in time for the summer, actually 5 days later than anticipated. So they had to push back the start to June 30th, 1930, but they got it going. The building here, for those who know it, you might wonder about this. There's the regular chimney here, but there's another chimney over here on the left, which is no longer there. But the way this was set up, the section from here over to this chimney would be the dining area. And then there's a wall in this area. And over here was the auxiliary room that was used for meetings, for rainy day activities, just for whatever they needed space for. And on the left end from here, over that end of the building was the kitchen. And that's why the chimney was there, not for a fireplace, but it was for ventilation for a propane oven and stove, which we'll see in just a moment. The picture on the bottom right is not terribly clear. It's from the newspaper, but it does show the dining hall, and it does show 8 tents arrayed, 4 along here and then 4 here. So that's the only picture I can find really of the tents. Well, one other in the brochure, but that's not relevant. In 1934, they ended up adding 4 more tents along over in this way on the right. But everybody loaded up again. The truck, Clapper, was Clapper Moving and Storage Company. They were down on, I think, like 3rd and Scott, somewhere in that area. The person who owned that actually had 2 sons, George, and I just drew a blank on his other one's name now. But George and Kenneth, I'm sorry. They were actually the first 2 campers to sign up for camp that summer. And one of them, Kenneth, at least, maybe the other one, but at least Kenneth was later a counselor at camp. But they loaded on the truck and drove out to the camp near Burlington. And the camp, for those of you who don't know, it is out near Burlington, Kentucky, off of 18. The road, Camp Ernst Road, was named after the camp. It was built by the county for the camp. The road was started in 1930, although they didn't quite finish it until 31. McAdam, it was just with crushed stone and ground into the ground to make a good solid surface. It was later refurbished in 1936 as a WPA project, Work Progress Administration. During the Depression, they had a team come out there and make it a lot better. And over on the left, we have Willard Wade, who's sitting on the right in the picture on the left, with his family. He was the physical director for the Covington Y for the men's department, and the boys' work secretary, which basically means he was the director for the boys' department. And he got that job in 1926, and then the camp started in 28. He was actually the last group down in 27 to Camp Daniel Boone. The last of those years he did that. He served as director then from 28 through 35, and then was offered a job in 36 in Asheville, North Carolina, where he was born and raised, and where he had worked for a while down there for a couple of years before coming to Covington. So he accepted that job. It was a job as basically assistant executive director in today's terminology. And that would have been the end for him. But as it happens, Willard Hutton, who I pointed out early in the picture outside Ernst Lodge, ended up having mental health. His doctor recommended that he move somewhere at the southwest of Florida, be more conducive to helping him recover. And so he resigned in the spring of 1939, and they quickly contacted Willard Wade in North Carolina and said, "Hey, come back, please." And so he did, and he remained as director of the Covington Y, and then later the Northern Kentucky YMCA once it expanded and the Tri-City Y, and Campbell County Y and Kenton County Y and so on. And so he ended up serving that position until 1972, the end of 72. And always, camp was always a big part of what he was focused on in his years there. Well, he started it, so I guess that was important to him. And here's his staff from 1930, way in the center. You can see one of the tents in the background. The staff is a bit larger these days. And here we have the kitchen. Again, this is in the left end of the dining hall. That would be Hattie Hill, who served as cook for the first 3 summers, and then the kitchen crew on the right along with her. And the camp store was on the right side of the dining hall. That was up until through 35. In 36, the kitchen was expanded and the store was moved to the other end of the building. And this is a picture of the campers getting the table set up. And this was actually from 1930. See the fireplace and the auxiliary room in the other end. Fancy plates and tablecloths and nice pictures there. So it's they didn't mess around when it came for mealtime, I guess. And we have swimming, had a dam put in. This is a dam at Big Bend, had a dam in Gunpowder Creek. And they use that for swimming and boating. This particular picture would be late 40s, early 50s. Based on a couple of people I can recognize in the pictures there. They'll come up later, so I'll mention them then. And for those of you who ever been familiar with buddy check, that's what the boys are holding hands over on the right. That's how they would check to make sure everybody was safe. So when you get in, they'd have to swim with the buddy. So they call for a buddy check. They're supposed to grab each other's hands and, oh, yep, we're all together still. So the girls, there's supposed to have been a girls session for the first year in 1928, according to the newspaper. One I put up earlier, I had another account as well. So it's been a 2-week session for boys 10 to 13, a 2-week session for boys 14 through 17. And then there was going to be a 1-week session for basically people who couldn't afford camp. It was just, or they'd get sponsored by, well, the Y would pay it or other people would donate money and they would come out for a week. And then it was scheduled for the girls to have a session after that. It didn't happen. I still have not discovered why. It didn't happen again in 29 or 30, but 31, they did come. And the woman here is Ann Campbell. I pointed out her, she was in the picture earlier outside of Ernst Lodge. She was the physical education director for the women's department in the company Y from 1918 through 1934. She also ran the physical education program for girls for the Covington schools, supervised all the city parks, the summer programs each summer. Started the first Girl Scout troop in Covington in 1921. Girl Scouts started in 1912, so she led a troop in 21. Twice a candidate for Kenton County clerk, unsuccessful both times. She did run it, I believe it was in 23 and 27. So she kept pretty busy. And there you can see one of the tents again with the, she's with the platform. We had a council ring and a chapel out there at the time. These were actually built by Willett Wade and staff, and the boys were out there at the time in that first summer. And they're in the same locations as they are today. We still have a chapel and a council ring, although now they're made out of stone. We'll see, well, at least the chapel in stone a bit later today. The stone council ring didn't have a long until 55, and that's a couple of years after what we're talking about. And these are from the 40s, first half of the 40s. And this is the brochure I have, the earliest one I have. This is actually a Covington YMCA brochure, but they devoted 2 pages to camp. And this is from 1936. So, and you can see the campers and staff over here. That was the whole group for one of the sessions. And the dining hall and the tents and so on. Still doing archery. Bugle call still, obviously. And camp at that time cost $5.50 a week. If you register in advance, otherwise it costs you 50 cents more. But or you didn't register early, rather, and $6.50 otherwise, if you're not a member. But I'm going to run through some of the directors. As I mentioned, Wade was there from 28 through 35. Then Paul Schulteis, who had been a counselor in 34 and who had become the assistant boys work secretary at the Company Y in 35. He ended up taking over after Wade left in 36. Just did it for that one summer because he ended up getting married and moving to Atlanta. His father-in-law had a business there. He went to work for him. And he was followed by Charles Freeman from 37 to 39. And these are all people who all ended up, well, the first three, we were boys work secretary, meaning they ran the boys department at Company Y through the year and then ran the camp in the summer. Freeman left at the end of the year in 39 to accept the job with the Chicago YMCA, and he stayed with the YMCA for a career for the rest of his life. Harvey Madeline came in 1940. For you UK fans, he played basketball and baseball for UK. I have a picture of him, the basketball team from 1931-32 season with a picture of Harvey Race in the front row, and back is second-year head coach Adolph Rupp. So I suspect some of you would be familiar with that name. He just had served that 1 year. Just before camp started in 41, he ended up joining the Army, ended up serving as a captain in World War II. The World War II was underway, of course, but the United States wasn't involved yet, but there was suggestion might be heading that way. It was kind of looked that way. So 41, we needed a director. Orm DeVan, who was actually a director, or as a counselor at both Big Bone and Ernst in the early days. And he was a teacher and coach at Holmes High School, had stayed active in the Company Y. He helped out with the things in the physical department. He ended up serving on the board at one point. He started a group, or helped start a group called the Wise Men's Club, just a group of men who volunteered just helping things with the Y, fundraising or fixing things or whatever was needed, really. So anyway, Willard Wade asked him if he would take it on for the year. He said, sure, I'll do that. And so he served as director in 41. And then in the fall, or then after that, in December, they got a new person, Richard Sneed, to be the boys work secretary and subsequently camp director. And his appointment to that position was announced in the Enquirer on Saturday, December 6, 1941. The next day, we had the attack on Pearl Harbor. And by the time camp started up in 42, he too had joined the Army and he was gone. So Orm DeVan once again stepped up and did that. Now, those who know camp would know that Orm DeVan later came back and served as camp director and boys work secretary from 1954 through 68. But this was his initial 2 years. And for the girls, we'd already mentioned Ann Campbell. After she left, Julia Stinkin came in, and she did that from 34 to 38. She got married and moved to Berea, Kentucky, where she spent the rest of her life. She was followed by Dorothy Westridge from 39 to 45. Again, these are all, they ran the women's and girls department at the Company Y, as well as working at the camp, because the camp sessions wouldn't be terribly long, might be a couple of weeks, maybe 3 weeks at the most during that time period. And then after she left, Drusilla Ham came in. She had been a teacher, and then she worked for the Y for a few years, and then decided to go back to teaching. And so she taught business classes at a high school in Ohio, in Cincinnati specifically. And in 1936, we got our first 8 cabins. These were located in the same places where the tents were previously. There was actually still 4 tents that were off to the side. I think they kept if as needed, because we had, before the cabins, there were 12 tents that slept 8 people each. So we couldn't very well replace that with 8 cabins that slept 8 people each. So we still needed the tents, depending on the numbers. We could also slip another bunk or 2 into those cabins if necessary. And we had that, if you notice that fancy flagpole, there was actually just a tree that is trimmed down, and found one straight or straightish. Gets the job done. And this is a brochure from 37. So I know it's just the next year, but it was just noteworthy, I thought, because this is the first brochure we have which features cabins, because they've been put in the year previous, of course. So just when I'll see all those group photos. Wonder what became of all these people. In May of 38, these is just six of the cabins. There's two more off to the left, not visible, but they planted some shrubs around the dining hall and around these cabins. The shrubs got a little out of hand a bit later, as we'll see. Just another shot of those early ones. Oh, and to orient people, if you know camp, we're looking down from the dining hall, and the pool would be over here later. You'll see the pool that comes up in this time frame. Mort Wiseman was hired as camp director. He did not serve as, he was the first director to not be associated with the Covington Y at all. He was superintendent of schools in Ironton, Ohio. And he did not work at the Covington Y. He kept his job as superintendent and just came here in the summers and ran the camp and then went back to the schools. And that's why he was there from 43 to 48. Left after that summer because there was a building project taking place in the school system. He wanted to be around for that. And he was replaced by a gentleman named William Stark, who had been his assistant director before. He served as director in 49. But he ended up getting another job with Y in Louisville, and so he left for that, and subsequently went on to work as a physical activities leader at the Indiana State Hospital in Evansville, and later, and then shortly after that became an Episcopal priest. But anyway, since he left after 49 for the summer of 50, Mort Wiseman was invited to come back, and so he did and stayed for 4 more summers. And that's him on the left of this picture. That's Dorothy Westridge, who was the Girls Camp director from 39 to 45. That we saw just a moment ago. And this is the camp store over on the left. This had been, or previously had been next to the kitchen for the first several years until the kitchen expanded. And this was moved over into the other, totally completely other end of the dining hall, what's known as the auxiliary room I pointed out earlier. And they just had the store and they're lining up for that. And there's ping pong, that's the store in the background as well. Just have a little flap that raises up for them. I think it was pretty much just a staged match. I don't think they would gather on that table quite so closely. I don't know if anybody noticed a net, but it's not actually a net, it's just a board. Guess it would last longer though. There's always that. Then there's the girls swimming, and check out these fancy lifeguard stands we have up in the trees. That was kind of fun over here. So still down the creek. This was near what's now the parking lot. It would come down over the hill to that area. And I'm just mentioning some of these landmarks for those who might be familiar with camp. Otherwise, you don't know where the parking lot is. So if that's the case, don't worry about it. It was in the creek. That's what matters. And prior to 1945, to get into camp, they had the entrance that people would know alongside the creek. That wasn't there. We didn't own that land until 56. That road was put in 57. But prior to that, from 30 through 44, they had to drive, well, even longer than that. They had to drive either through the creek, or sometimes a bridge had there's a water table bridge, which is rather low and because sometimes did flood it. So sometimes you had to drive through the creek anyway, but usually it was there. They put in the concrete bridge that's currently there in 56. But anyway, they would drive through the creek or across the water table bridge, whatever was there. And then there was a place called Camp Ernst Lane up, just going up the hill, just on the other side of the creek. They would drive back on the other side of the creek, and then they had to drive through Gunpowder Creek. Always, there was not another option, just drive through the creek. It was beside the dam, so the water's a little lower generally, unless the creek got up. And there were cases where they had to delay the start or end of camp because they couldn't get the campers out of there. And there were a few occasions we had to bring supplies in by boat across the creek. But in 1945, Frank Michaels is pictured here. This is Willett Wade, by the way. His name is William Lyons. He was actually an engineer. He designed the bridge. But Michaels paid for it. And actually, the year prior to this, he had donated some land also on the creek, on the other side of the creek, further down, to the Boy Scouts. And they started with Camp Powderhorn, later renamed Camp Michaels after him. And then William Burke, who was one of the board members at the time for the Covington Y. And so that's what it looked like from the other side of the creek going toward camp. There was the 2 pillars with a chain there. Those pillars are still there. The bridge is gone. That was taken out after the main entrance road was put in 1957. And they bulldozed that part out. But it might be a nice hike to go find those pillars. And this will give you a sense of what camp looked like in 1945. This is the creek down here, Gunpowder Creek. They would come along the other side, drive across the new bridge, and then up into camp. This is the road going along here through the fields. We had, well, actually generally a baseball field, but this is more in the fall. So after the season, they have some things, they have crops planted, different things would grow there. Had a farm going, it was raised some money. But anyway, this way we come up past the administration building, and then a road going up behind the dining halls. We have the eight cabins that we talked about earlier. The dining hall, and those are 1936 again. The dining hall put in 1930. The director's cabin was also put in 1930. The camp hospital was added in 1931, and the cook's cabin in 38. So gives you a sense of where things are. And then also we ended up having later cabins along over here. And then a pool was over here eventually, more cabins here, and there's other tents as well, or other cabins still since then, but we're not getting into all that. Over here is what we now call the sport court, one time the blacktop. At this point, it was just a dirt surface. There's a couple of basketball goals. There's also, if you make up the lines, there's line for tennis, basketball, badminton, and it was just a sport area. And then in 56, asphalt was added, which made it a much nicer surface. Dirt doesn't work as well when it rains. Then the Temple of the Trees replaced the previous log chapel that we saw earlier. And that's still there in existence today. Oh, as a note for those of you who are familiar with the Covington Y, the old building was there on, well, the building still there, but when the Y was there on Madison and Pike. It operated as a YMCA from 1913 to 1987. And that's when the Northern Kentucky YMCA merged with the YMCA of Cincinnati and Hamilton County to form what we now know as the YMCA of Greater Cincinnati. But the Covington Y had fallen on hard times. It needed a lot of work done on it. About $200,000 worth needed just to bring it up to code. There were number of issues they had with it. It had been losing money. People were moving out to the suburbs. That's from Tri-City and Campbell County. They were growing, but the Covington Y was struggling. So it was agreed that would be sold, and it was purchased by, I don't know if anybody familiar with George Buddick. He and his brother Otto Buddick were campers and counselors at Camp Ernst. In fact, this is George Buddick sitting here with the striped shirt. He bought the old Y building in '87. For development, didn't actually develop it. There was still issues, and he ended up selling to somebody else, or selling it to another group in '89. And oh well, I won't go through all that. That's not really the point. I'm just going to point out George Buddick. They're just some chores. Laundry day. It looks like a couple of boys needed to get a haircut, so I had to work that in. And just a couple of boys here with Camp Director Mort Wiseman. And the camp board back here, that's Michael's there, the one who donated the bridge. And over here on the left is Willard Wade, and over here is Mort Wiseman again sitting there. Oh, I was going to point out too, we had a walkway going up to the porch, but the windows were just screened. There was no glass at that time. Well, there was glass, not in the windows. There was obviously glass elsewhere. But there were boards you can kind of make out up here. They dropped down over the windows in the off season. They would just be swung up. There's a hook up there to hold them up in place, which is probably not terribly relevant, but it's history. What happens? Details can be fun. Now in 1946, the administration building was expanded a bit. The new cabin was added. The other cabins we talked about previously are to the right of this picture. You'll see them in the next picture, but they're over there. So this one was added in 46. And then the following year, kind of an old picture. I kind of like it though. It looks historic somehow. But there's the other cabin. Then this one was put in 46. And then these three plus two others off to the left, you can't see in what's now the parking lot, were added in 47. Those are the shrubs I mentioned that were planted back in May of 38. They've gotten a bit out of hand by 47, so they didn't last much beyond this. Actually, each morning the counselor had to use a machete just to get his campers out for breakfast. And this is where the cabins were, what is now the parking lot. This is where the cabins later moved on the other side of the pool once there was a pool, but not yet. So Proctor's little banjo playing, and so. So there's some of the camp cooks. I mentioned some of the ones earlier. This is Chester and Isabella Rice. Isabella was in charge of the cooking. Her husband Chester was helping out. Chester was also a longtime teacher, industrial arts teacher for the Lincoln Grant School in Covington. It's no longer in existence, but it was then. And Isabella Rice was through the 40s. Actually, her last year was 1950. She worked out there until then. And I'll say more about that in a moment. Then we have the dining hall. The kitchen, as mentioned, is at the left end of the dining hall. That was the kitchen area. We saw that earlier. In 1947, a new kitchen was put in. It's back here in the back of the dining hall, where it's still located to this day, although it's a new kitchen, but it's there. If you notice, the windows are in the front. They have these black frames. And everybody's serving windows, they also have black frames. That's because the serving windows were created out of the actual, just the windows on the back wall of the dining hall, what has been used previously. They already had the holes, so they made use of them. And then looking at it, you can see the auxiliary room again on the other side. And those of you familiar with camp might be wondering about mangy moose. There's a moose head that hangs on above the mantle there, but that wasn't until we got into the 50s. And this was still 47. Also noteworthy in 47, camp got electricity. So no more lanterns. The hardware is there. There's no bulbs in them yet. I don't know if they put a ladder up there to put those in. I don't know why they just took a bulb in at the time, but oh well. It's too late now. That was in 1947. This would have been a school group. I'm guessing I'm going to guess 4-H, because there's a girl here with a 4-H sheriff from Pendleton County. And the 4-H group used to come to camp in June before the Washington summer sessions, and they did that as a rental group from 1931 through 1965, at which point they started their own camp, and they moved there in 66. But they back in well, a bit past this time period. Well, I'll point to that later. It's I can point it out what you can see, but this is looking toward the other end of the dining hall. I can see the new kitchen over here still, and this end is where the dining hall, or sorry, where the kitchen had been originally. Now we have flag raising and lowering. That was just, they were just gathering outside of the dining hall with the flagpole, as you can see, and the vehicle are over here and over here. So that was a daily thing, well, twice a day actually. And then I mentioned that Isabella Rice had been there in the 40s, and she stayed through 50. Beginning of 48, the gentleman here on the right, Alonzo Ballard, who's a cook at Berea College, came in as assistant her for from 48 through 50, and then she ended up leaving after that, and his wife Louise joined him with her 3 daughters, and so Alonzo and Louise ended up there as cooks until 1983. So a long stretch. He was at Berea even longer, as Berea 40 plus years. He was also a Baptist minister. He's associate pastor of the Ferristown Baptist Church in Berea. And the cabin behind him, that is originally had been the director's cabin, but the director by this point was staying down in the administration building, and this is where the Ballards then stayed during the summer. So people came to think of that as their cabin because they were there for quite a long stretch. And then over on the left, that is where is Alonzo Ballard at the 50th anniversary of camp. We saw Wade earlier at the 50th anniversary. We saw his with his family group outside the cabin. And there's Louise on the right. I did not crop that. It was just the way it was. I didn't crop her out. That's Louise and Alonzo and their kitchen staff in 1951. So actually, there's old pictures up on the shelf. Oh, also in 1948, got a new director for the girls' camp, Martha Bunch, who's pictured on the right. That was not the way she normally dressed. She was more shorts and t-shirt. That was more her style, but they were dressing up I'm assuming dressing up. I'm almost positive that they didn't dress this way all the time. But they were there, and she was all. That's her picture on the right. Also at the 50th anniversary commemoration. But she served as Girls Camp director from 1948 to 71. She also ran the Girls and Women's Department during that time. She actually started as the physical director of the Women's Department in 46. But after Drusilla Ham moved on, she took over the Women's and Girls Department, and then as camp director, which she loved. Wonderful lady. Some of you may have known her. In 72, she became associate executive director at the Covington Y, and stayed in that position until she retired in 79, although she kept working. She also used to bring a group out, even after she was in a camp, she brought a group out to campus. Officially, the Covington YMCA Women's Supper Club, and they would have their YMCA Women's Supper Club weekend, but they came to be referred to as Martha's Bunch, because her name was Martha Bunch. And then there was a drive-on starting in 49 for a swimming pool. They've been swimming in the creek from the beginning, but it was sometimes issues with the shading, and this also better filtration system and so on. Well, a filtration system, which you can't have in a creek. So they started raising money for that. James Burton, who's pictured here, and on the right hand, the picture or check to Wade, served as president of the Wise Men's Club at the time, and he was also heading up this committee. He was later the president of the Wise Board of Directors, a role earlier held by Richard P. Ernst. He also, according to him, was one of the boys who was tossing football back in that fall day in 1928, when Ernst and Wade stood on the hill and looked out at what was to become Camp Ernst. And that's just a staff photo from 1950. There's Wiseman, again, Wade, A.D. Alonzo, you might know him as a longtime coach and teacher at Holmes, and later principal of the grade schools. Let's see, there we go. And we did have horses for one summer at 52. A.D. Allen took charge of that. He was also assistant camp director, but he was keeping an eye on the horses. And then that was just 1 year for horse program. The horses came back in 61 and continued to this day, but they did have that one experience for that summer. And there's the rec hall, which was completed, well, not completed, but completed up to this point in 1952. It's basically just a pavilion. This end was finished, it's walled in, or half wall anyway, and then screens. That was actually where the camp store was moved there from the dining hall, but the rest of it was just open. There was picnic tables in there. That was later, walls added along there and doors put in, screens. That became more of an enclosed area in 55. And then in 58, there was a craft shop added to the back of the building. That building is still there. So actually those rocks, they put in paper, they put out a call for volunteers in 51, especially volunteers with trucks, because they were going to transport rocks from the creek over to this area so they could build the rec hall, and they did. And then when they finished it up in 55, they also got more volunteers coming up to get more stones, these stones to finish that, and also to construct the council ring, the stone council ring that we have to this day. That was all in 55. And there's just administration building again. There's Wiseman and Allen once again looking for the dining hall. That's the administration building. That's the front of it here. And this is the back of it coming up from the creek. In 1952, we had a case of polio associated with camp. A.D. Allen, the assistant camp director, ended up contracting polio. This is after boys camp had ended, but there had been a boy who had been sick, and he'd been helping take care of him. So I'm not sure if there was a connection or not, but he was diagnosed with polio, and by that time the boys camp had ended. Girls had come out. We went co-ed in 76, but prior to that, boys would be out for 5-6 weeks, and girls would come out 3, 4, whatever it be, it varied. But the girls had just arrived on Sunday for their first session, and on Wednesday, Green Line buses were sent out to take them home. So that was, and then in the middle, there's a picture of him heading to Warm Springs, Georgia. You might remember that if you're familiar with the history of or the biography of Franklin Roosevelt, who spent a good amount of time there himself for the same reason. And that's A.D. Allen later at the 50th anniversary. So Got that. And then the next year, they finally got the pool finished because they needed to finish. They decided the best bet would be to have a pool, have it all, the whole filtration system. And so that's what that looks like. A couple of shots of that. And just a picture of the girl staff from that summer in '53. There's Martha Bunch. That's how she dressed more typically. Oh, this was also the last year for Mort Wiseman as camp director. He left his position for with the camp and also resigned as superintendent of the schools in Ironton in order to accept the position as city manager for the city of Ironton. And he served in that capacity till 61 when he died of a heart attack. He was still city manager then. On a more cheerful note, though, this would have been camp in 1953. So this is our final year. Our final slide, does that matter? Because so we have the original 8 cabins there, then the 146, and then the 47 ones, and these 2 over here. Dining hall, of course, administration building. Pool just been completed. The building down here, the pump house, this served as a filtration system for the entire camp. All the water was being pumped from there and filtered from there. And so that ended up serving that purpose until '69 when we got city water. And then you just used exclusively for filtering the pool until '78, and the filtration system was moved up to where next to the pool. It's more convenient. That building is still there, but it's just used for storage. Subsequently, the next year, there were 3 cabins. I mentioned the 4-H group earlier. They paid for the materials and built 3 cabins on this side of the pool. And then in '56, these 2 cabins were moved from here and put on either side of those 3 cabins, so that a road could be put in May of '57, the main road coming in here, that's our parking lot. And a new administration building was added in '65. But that's how it looks then, and that's pretty much that. So I think the timing worked out all right. So I'll stop sharing here and we can... Back to you, Heather.
Yeah, okay. If we want to go ahead and start out with the trivia question, talk about that a little bit. So the question was, for whom was YMCA Camp Ernst named? And the answer was U.S. Senator Richard P. Ernst. We did have a winner. That was Jacob Runge. I hope I'm saying that right. Yeah, so congratulations to you. We'll get your prize in the mail.
And in case anybody was curious, P stood for Pretlow. Pretlow. But yeah, Richard Pierre, that's fine. That's who he was. Yeah. Good job. Was it Jake? You said, yeah, good job.
Yeah. And we do have a few questions. So the first question was, were non-Christians eligible to participate in the camp?
Yes. It was just open for anybody. But it was a YMCA camp, but I would assume the bulk of them would be Christian, but it wasn't a requirement.
So our next question was, did people live out on the camp property year round, and did they do anything outside of summertime sessions?
Not originally. There was a caretaker out there, because even the director, they've worked for the Covington Y as the boys' work secretary typically, and just come out there for the summer, or the girls' work secretary, whatever, whichever one they were doing. But no, I guess by the '40s, there was a caretaker out there, and we had a caretaker then after him as well. He started, Stanley Mullins, his name was. He started in '51, stayed out there through '78. So there have been people, today there are people who live on property year round. I think it's to be four people that live on property year round. And we have a year round operation, mostly summer, but we do have rental groups. We have some weekend programs and so on. We just had a Labor Day family camp just wrapped up a few days ago. So.
And then the last question we had was, why did they put the cabin so far away from the dining hall?
Well, to work up an appetite. No, I don't have an answer for that really. It's just, that was a good location, nice flat area. There's an area they could add more.
Yeah.
And it really wasn't a miserable place. There's some hilly land there, so otherwise that was the best spot. It's a nice clear area. And also this is where the tents were. But I guess because they affected the question, why did they put the tents so far away? It's not really that far though. You can see it, and you can smell the smells come down. And
Yeah.
Get your appetite going.
So we do have a minute or so for another question or two. So if anybody still has a question, go ahead and get those in the chat. Otherwise, we have another minute or two. Do you have anything else you would like to say about the camp at all?
No, Jacob's asking about that. Would it be a follow-up from 54 to the present? We could always do another one if there's interest for that. I would certainly be willing. Oh, somebody Pamela's here in this mid-60s. Great. So you know Martha Bunchton.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and share that comment if you don't mind. Pamela Hawk said that she attended in the mid-60s and she loved it. She went 3 times. She's 69 years old and she remembers Miss Bunch and Alonzo walking up the hill from the cabin, opening the doors, and the smells of delicious food. A great experience. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, just curious, was you the one who asked why the cabins are so far away from the dining hall? I'm just no, I'm just no, she said no. She said no. She's denying it. Okay. Hi, Alex. Yeah. So you said Alex. I know him.
We do have someone joining from Ecuador who says thanks from Ecuador. So
Ecuador, would that be Frank Henson?
Yes, it would be.
He was camp director from 73 through 75. And a good friend. So, but he's traveling the world these days. Well, at least Ecuador.
I guess if there's no more questions, we can go ahead and start wrapping up. So we would like to remind everyone that we have fresh art in a couple days at the museum. This year we are back in person with an afternoon of food, drinks, and fun with friends as the bidding begins on fresh art created en plein air by local artists to support youth educational programming at BCM. Tickets are still available for $75 per person and include cocktails, hors d'oeuvres by Funky's Catering of Cincinnati, Ohio, and music by local violinist Preston Charles, followed by a live and lively auction. John Lomax, the former news anchor for WKRC TV, is the MC, and H. David Wallace, CEO and chairman of the board of Heritage Bank, will conduct the auction. So we hope to see you all there. Go and get your tickets. It's only in 4 days on the 11th. We also have the museum cruise-in on Saturday, September 24th from 11 a.m. until 2 p.m. There's going to be lots of cool cars and trucks, so come out for that. Our next Northern Kentucky History Hour will be on September 21st with Cora Arney on the history of Baker Hunt. Hope that you all tune in for that. So it will not be next week as we continue our bi-weekly schedule, but on the 21st. That's all we have for this evening. Thank you again to all of our sponsors and supporters of BCM, and thanks to the staff, trustees, and members of the Behringer-Crawford Museum. For more Northern Kentucky history through the week, you can check out our Facebook page and our YouTube channel, where you can find the latest installments of the Curators Chat with our curator of collections, Jason French. All the previous history hours are also on there, so please like and subscribe to all of those videos. Until then, take care, everyone, and good night. Thanks for coming, and thanks so much, Brian.
You're welcome.